What happened to Colby Covington? Going into UFC 296, a lot of people, including myself, were really excited about this matchup between Leon Edwards and Colby Covington. Due to the fact that this fight could have went either way, Leon Edwards has clearly proven at this point that he can counter wrestle at times. He also can strike, obviously, at a very high level, but Colby Covington has proven to be a guy that has phenomenal wrestling, has phenomenal pressure, and overall it was seen as a matchup that could have went either way. But obviously at this point, as UFC 296 has come and gone, it was pretty clear that the Colby Covington we saw against Leon Edwards was a completely different Colby Covington than we're used to seeing in the past. And a question that a lot of you, including myself, have at this point is what happened to Colby Covington? But quickly, before we get the video started, for those of you who may not know, I'm Juicy MMA, I make opinionative MMA content, and if you guys enjoy videos similar to this, hit that subscribe button, that like button, and that post notification bell. But anyways, let's get into it. Over the years, Colby Covington has really turned himself into a star, not only due to his character that he plays, but also due to his actual skill inside the octagon. What Colby was able to do was extremely impressive. He was able to beat a ton of successful fighters. He was also able to take Kamaru Usman to his two toughest fights ever, and at the time of both of those fights, people saw Kamaru Usman as the #1 pound-for-pound fighter and a guy that just couldn't be beat. And the reason for why Colby was able to be so successful was due to his overall style. When you looked at Colby's game, I think it comes down to three factors: his cardio, his striking, and his wrestling. I think his striking was important because it did a really nice job at setting up his wrestling, and overall I did think Colby actually had pretty underrated striking, and of course his wrestling ability was extremely important because it was a main aspect of his game. The fact that Colby was able to shoot in again and again and again, and eventually get you to the ground and tire you out, and then once the fight got to the ground, he was able to have a ton of success as well, is a huge reason for why Colby was able to be so successful. And his cardio was extremely important because of his overall pressure style. Basically what Colby did out there is he would just tire out his opponents and eventually find a finish or eventually find a decision victory. And the reason for why that style was so successful for Colby was due to the fact that he doesn't tire out at all. He can fight 5, 10, 15 rounds at that style that he holds, and it didn't really matter. It always just seemed like he was a fresher fighter out there, and he never truly gassed. And in my opinion, those three factors are the biggest reasons for why Colby was able to be so successful and for why he was able to get 3 title shots throughout his UFC career so far. But if you watch Colby Covington versus Leon Edwards this previous weekend, it was pretty clear that all those things that I just mentioned were not things that Colby utilized effectively whatsoever. Colby didn't utilize his cardio by using his pressure style, Colby didn't really utilize his wrestling until the 5th round, and Colby didn't even really utilize his striking as effectively as he normally did in the past. But a question that some of you may be wondering at this point is why? Why did Colby Covington look so different in this matchup versus Leon Edwards than he really ever did in any other fight in the past? Well, in my opinion, I think it could come down to a couple different factors, but the first factor that I want to touch upon is his age. Now, I know in his post-fight press conference, Colby Covington himself said that ring rust was a huge reason for why he didn't feel all that comfortable out there and why he didn't look all that great out there against Leon, but in my opinion, I don't necessarily completely agree with that. Of course, I do think it could potentially have played somewhat of a factor. Colby hasn't fought in 2 years. At the end of the day, Colby actually has been a guy that does take a lot of breaks in between fights in the past, and we really never saw ring rust from him in the past. So I don't necessarily think this is a huge factor, but I think more so the factor that he's 35 at this point and he also didn't fight in 2 years, those two factors in combination is a huge reason for why Colby didn't really look himself. I thought Colby looked very slow out there, I thought Colby looked very hesitant out there, and I do think a lot of those factors could be contributed to his overall age. But the next factor that I want to touch upon is the fact that he respected Leon Edwards way too much. Because obviously Leon is the better striker out there. He's a lot more sharp than Colby Covington, he's clearly a lot faster at any point of Colby's career, and he's just a guy that could definitely find openings. But when you look at Leon's career, he's not necessarily a guy that gets all that many finishes. The only finish that Leon has gotten as of late was that head kick knockout over Kamaru Usman. And the reason for why Leon was able to find that head kick was due to the fact that he was fighting at range. And if Colby didn't respect Leon Leon as much and pressured him a lot more than he ended up doing, that head kick wouldn't have even been available to throw. So although I think if Colby did pressure, he definitely would have got hit more than he did, at the same time, I don't necessarily think Leon would be able to find that shot that would have knocked out Colby, at least with his hands, and I do think Colby would have overall had a lot more success if he didn't respect Leon as much as he did. But actually, when you looked at the way Colby Covington fought against Leon Edwards, that's not necessarily the first time we saw Colby fight like that. Because if you look back at Colby's fight against Kamaru Usman the second time, in the first 2 rounds, Colby actually fought very similarly to the way he fought against Leon Edwards, as Colby was definitely falling back against Kamaru. He was throwing out a couple shots, but overall being very cautious. But ever since Colby got hit with those 2 big shots by Kamaru Usman in the second round, putting him down twice, in rounds 3, 4, and 5, he completely changed his game plan. Colby was doing a really nice job at pressuring Kamaru a lot more in rounds 3, 4, and 5 than he was in the first 2 rounds, and he just looked a lot more comfortable for it. And after changing his game plan in rounds 3, 4, and 5, a lot of people, including myself, thought that fight probably could have or maybe even should have ended in a draw. But overall, the point that I'm trying to make is in this Leon Edwards fight, there really was never that moment where Colby got hurt really bad or that Colby got dropped. And in a weird way, I think it was actually a negative for Colby. I think if Colby got hurt or he got dropped, I think he would have probably pushed forward a lot more than he ended up doing. I think he probably would have went for a lot more takedowns. He probably would have been successful on some of or even a lot of those takedowns, and I just think he would have had a lot more success. Because even though Colby's performance against Leon was not good whatsoever, when you looked at how he was performing in the later rounds of that fight, more particularly in the 5th round, Colby was actually having some level of success. Now obviously he wasn't pressing forward like he normally does, but he was pressing forward more in the later half of the fight than he was doing earlier on, and due to that he was having some success. He was landing a couple shots on Leon. Now obviously singular shots are not going to hurt any of Colby's opponents, as Colby doesn't hit all that hard, but regardless he was landing a little bit, and he even got a couple of takedowns later on in that fight. And I think that's enough proof that if Colby ended up fighting like he normally does, whether he just did that from the beginning or if he got dropped he changed his game plan and resorted back to his old ways, I do think there was a chance that Colby could have potentially won this matchup. Now obviously there is the possibility that Colby is just too old at this point. He isn't necessarily the same guy that he was in the past. Of course that is a possibility, but regardless of that fact, I still do think in a weird way if he got hurt really bad or he got dropped, he probably would have fought a little bit better or maybe even a lot better than he ended up fighting in this matchup versus Leon. But overall, I do think there are a lot of potential reasons to describe why we saw the Colby Covington we did against Leon, but overall I am very interested to see in where Colby's career goes from here. Because I know Colby after the fight called out Wonderboy Thompson, but in my opinion, if Colby has his eyes set on Wonderboy, he probably doesn't necessarily care about fighting the guys he needs to beat in order to get another title shot, and maybe at this point in his career he just wants money fights. But regardless of who Colby fights next, if it's Shavkat, if it's Wonderboy, or if it's someone else, I am very interested to see if this was a one-off bad performance or Colby Covington is in a new stage of his UFC career. But anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Why, in your opinion, do you think Colby Covington looks so different against Leon Edwards than he ever did in the past? But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did enjoy, check one of these 2 videos popping up now, and until the next time, peace out guys.